will do a brief introduction of someone who has known me long enough to be able to say that she wasn't really all that impressed with my presentation the first time she heard me 25 years ago or so. But we've been in the same club for all that time. And I certainly understood her understanding of my skills. And so our next speaker is an expert, the closest thing I know to a real expert in dealing with storytelling. And I've heard her add so much to everyone in the audience's presentation skills by telling us how to add stories to your speeches. And we all know that's effective. Along with humor adding to your speeches, we'll all walk out of this room tonight better at storytelling and adding humor to our speeches. Roxanne Andersen shares 3 ways to give your story more impact. 3 ways to give your story more impact. Roxanne Andersen.
Roxanne, you're muted.
This will be so much better with it unmuted. I want you to think of one of your favorite movies. One that kept you on the edge of your seat. You were rooting for the hero. You didn't know whether he was going to make it. There was a huge obstacle to overcome, and it had your rapt attention. Do you remember the message that the story conveyed? Because when we tell stories within our speeches, the point is to convey a certain message. And when people remember the story, they also remember the message. Now, here's the thing. The more impact the story has, the better they will remember the message. Usually the stories that really hold our attention have a huge obstacle that needs to be overcome. I've used the word obstacle, but if you wanted the literary term, it's called conflict. Or the way I prefer to think of it is tension. Tension is like a rubber band. If you put a little bit of tension on it, you get a little bit of impact. More tension, more impact. You put a whole lot of tension and you get a whole lot of impact. So what we want to look at tonight is how do you add impact to the stories that you tell. Think of your signature story, one that you want to develop really well and use again and again, and let's look at ways that you might add impact to it so that the message will stick better. There are 3 places that you can add impact. The first one is setting, the second one is the characters, and the third one is the plot. So we're going to start with the setting. Setting is just a word for where and when the story takes place. So to illustrate this, I want to use the example of the movie Apollo 13. Apollo 13 has this great setting. It is set in an America that is very patriotic. We had been behind Russia in the space race, but then Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and walked on the moon, and suddenly we were out in front. So there was that going, but also there was the memory in everybody's recent memory of the Apollo 8 mission. The capsule had re-entered our atmosphere. When it landed, the hatch stuck. A fire erupted, and the astronomers, not the astronomers, the astronauts who were in there all died in the fire. Everybody remembered that. And now you had Apollo 13, and 13 is an inherently unlucky number. All of that creates the setting. And the more the obstacles, the more the tension. And in this case, you're putting the impact, that tension, in the setting. The second place you can add tension is in the characterization. Sometimes there's conflict between the characters. Sometimes the characters are just so different that there is a certain tension there. And I want to use the movie Hitch, starring Will Smith, as an example. In that movie, Will Smith is the love doctor. He has all the right looks, all the right words, all the right moves, and he hires himself out to people who want to get a certain date and they don't know how to do it. And so he shows them what to say, how to dress, and all of that. But the irony is, early in his life, early in his college career, he was dumped by a girl. And he doesn't really believe that he can have a long-term committed relationship. He doesn't go for it. He only goes for the short game. Well, one of his clients is Kevin James. He plays the part of Albert, and Albert is an utter klutz. He drips mustard on himself. He sprays Coca-Cola all over himself. He is wearing white sports socks and loafers with a business suit. And Albert is in love with the beautiful heiress, Allegra Cole. He can't get her. She doesn't even know he lives. So he hires Will Smith to teach him what to do. But the irony is, even though he is such a klutz, he is willing to give everything he has to gain the love of his life. He's willing to give everything. And so you have these characters who are very different, and they kind of run in conflict to each other. And when you have that, it adds a certain tension. So you've got the setting, you've got the characters. The third one is the plot. So if you were to make a graph of a story, you would start with the setting right here. And then, okay, so here's the setting. Then there's a point when the conflict happens. Something disrupts that setting, and the conflict happens. And then from there, you have a plot line, and you want to, if possible, for the purposes of like a Toastmaster speech, accelerate, increase that conflict about 3 times. It's not a law written in stone. It merely works well. But if you can keep increasing the conflict as you go through the plot line, the storyline, until you get to the very climax, and then the story resolves. So let's go back and look at Apollo 13. I actually went back and watched the movie and took notes, and the conflict in there accelerates more than 20 times. I'm going to give you just a few examples, but basically everything that could go wrong went wrong. And here's what happened in that story. First, the engine goes out. Then the alarms go off, and you get that famous line, "Houston, we've got a problem." Then they find they're venting gas into space. They're running out of power. The CO2 level is toxic. They're approaching Earth at the wrong angle, and there is a tornado warning at the very edge of the entry zone. Not only that, is the heat shield still in place? No one really knows. And so you have the conflict increasing in the plot and creating quite a bit of tension and quite a bit of impact. Everybody's on the edge of their seat. What I want us to do tonight is an exercise. And I'm going to give you one story, but I'm going to give it to you twice. I'm going to give it to you the way I first heard it. Then I'm going to give it to you adding more impact to it, more conflict. And then you're going to tell me where I added the conflict, where I added the tension to improve the story. Okay? So the story is one that actually happened in our family. And the first version was as it was told to me by Bob right after the incident. Many of you know Bob. He does not give a lot of detail. He is very left-brained. And I never knew the rest of the story until much later. But this is the way Bob told me the story. Now, as it happened, our family was vacationing in Grand Tetons National Park. It was 11 years ago. And Bob and our youngest daughter, Amy, decided to take a hike. They got about halfway into this canyon and they got caught in a storm. On the way back, they turned around, and on the way back, Bob pulled a muscle and Amy was getting really cold. And so then they got back and the boat had been canceled because of the storm. So they had to walk around the lake. They were really cold, but they finally did make it back to the car. That's the story that I heard from Bob. I was going to use this story for a TLI workshop that I taught 3 years ago. So I thought, why don't I ask Amy what her version of the story is? Oh my goodness, whole different version of the story. So here we go with the new and improved version. 11 years ago, my family and I were vacationing in Grand Tetons National Park. It had been a wonderful week and the weather had been beautiful. So midway through the week, Bob and our youngest daughter, Amy, decided to take a hike through Paintbrush Canyon. Bob was 60 years old at this point in time, and he was in pretty good shape for 60 years old. Amy was 27. Amy is our fitness guru. She is one solid hunk of muscle with a little bit of skin stretched over it and no body fat, none. So Bob and Amy were walking along. They'd always had this great relationship, but sometimes you don't know how good a relationship is, how strong it is, until it is tested. That day, they were just enjoying each other's company. The sky was blue, the clouds were white, and they made it about halfway into Paintbrush Canyon when all of a sudden they noticed the sky had gotten very dark. Not only that, the temperature had plummeted precipitously. On that day, Amy was wearing a pair of short shorts and one of those moisture wicking shirts. They work great when it's warm out, but that was all she had on at that point. They were walking along, and all of a sudden there is this lightning, it just in the sky, and no time between the lightning and the boom, lightning, boom, and they knew that storm was right upon them. They're looking around for shelter, and there is nothing. So they just have to turn around and start going back. Well, on the way, they had been walking over these large river rocks. Not too hard, kind of a moderate hike. But as the rain began falling in large drops, it formed a thin layer of mud on the rocks. So they're going carefully, carefully, and all of a sudden, Bob slips and he pulls a muscle in his groin. Really painful. At first, it wasn't too bad. At first. So they kept going. But at this point, Amy's getting colder and colder. She's beginning to shiver because that moisture wicking shirt, it's great on a warm day. It'll keep you nice and cool. But at this point, when she's drenched, it is sucking every bit of heat out of her body. And she is shaking, just shivering visibly. They kept going on, down, down, and finally made it to the mouth of the canyon. A little bit farther, and they made it to the boat dock, which is where you catch the boat to take you back across the lake. So they're standing in line, and now Amy's shaking has just gotten violent to the point where a lady behind them taps on her shoulder. She says, "I'm from Wisconsin and you are getting hypothermia. Take my jacket." Amy said, I have a sweatshirt in my pack. I was trying to keep it dry, but I can't reach it. So of course, immediately Bob and the lady got the sweatshirt out. They put it over her head. And Bob, at this point, actually had to reach down and pull Amy's hand up through the arms of the sweatshirt because her body was actually curling in on itself the way it does when you have hypothermia and your body is trying to conserve every last bit of body heat. So they got that on, and right then they get the announcement from the doc. Sorry, folks, we just got orders. No more boats until the lightning stops. Well, immediately, some of the people in line ahead of them just took off. They just said, hey, we're hoofing it back to the parking lot. It was about 2 miles walking around the lake. But Amy and Bob couldn't walk well. Neither of them could walk well at this point. And yet her shaking was getting worse and worse. They had to make a decision. Bob looked her in the eye and he says, Amy, you go on without me. And Amy says to him, no, Daddy, I'm not leaving you. Sometimes you don't know how strong a relationship is until it's tested. They had to come to some decision. They had to do something. They couldn't stand there. So what they decided was they would both go on at their own rate. Amy would try to keep her eye on the hikers who knew how to get to the parking lot. She did not know how to get there, but she could barely still see them in the distance, and keep her other eye on Bob, who was coming along behind her. They did make it. Amy, stiff-legged and armed, running like the Frankenstein monster, and Bob coming along behind, dragging one leg like Quasimodo. The first I knew about it was when I got the phone call from Amy from the car. It was the first time they'd had cell reception. And the call went like this. We're okay. Daddy went to get hot chocolate. Okay, you're on. That's the story. How many, by a show of hands, and I can only see part of you on the screen, but by a show of hands, how many of you would say you like the first story better? Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Oh, even Bob didn't vote for it, my goodness. Okay, how many thought it is better with some impact? Okay, all right. Okay, so now you tell me, you can unmute yourselves to do this. And like I said, I can try calling on you, but I can't see about 3 people on the second screen. So where did I add the conflict, the tension? Okay, we always have a rule when Bob and I teach. If nobody answers, Bob has to answer first.
Well, here I am.
Oh, okay. All right. Art Douglas, good. Oh, excellent storyteller. Yes. Where does the tension get added? Where did we get this? Oh, Art,
you muted yourself again.
Yeah, Art, you are muted again.
Okay.
Okay.
In the character description, in the setting, in the plot,
be specific.
in the action that took place, in all those things, you made it so much, you added so much color, so much detail, so much emotion, so much tension.
Okay, give us some specific examples. Just one. Just one.
Just one. Your daughter's shivering.
Okay. Yeah, she's shivering.
He said she got cold. You said she was Shivering, and you even shivered yourself.
Okay.
Good vocal variety.
Okay, thank you. At first she was shivering visibly. She got to shivering violently too. So,
Yeah.
okay. All right, Michael Osier.
Oh, I loved how you did the lightning and the thunder and the rain, the lightning. I mean, you even did a rhythm to it. And I was feeling it. I was feeling it and wanting to run really fast.
Okay, this is actually a lightning storm. It's very near Grand Tetons. It's Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So, yeah. Who else do we have? Okay, Jose.
Yes, you also covered the rocks with mud, which made it so hard for them to go over them.
Okay, yeah. They started out kind of a moderate hike. Now they are going over these slimy rocks.
You changed also the part about the boat and Bob just said that they canceled the boat rides and you added lightning and all those sorts of things that had that extra level of tension.
Okay, I think I saw Daryl Zeller.
Yeah, so with the having to put on the sweater and describe how Bob had to go ahead and pull her arms out for the sweater, just using the jacket and the sweater completely.
Okay.
Angie's got her hand up, Rox.
Roxanne,
Oh, yes, Marsha. Hi.
this is Marsha. Hi. I don't know. I feel that the Riverside Club here should, not say anything because we are all there in TLI. Here's the handouts that you have. So I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but because this is the story you used to teach us that day. But I think now, I can see more of how your descriptive language, and like, for instance, when you start describing how beautiful the weather is, and then right after talking about how it changed, the temperature dropped, and so the conflict there. But and the same thing with the wardrobe, Amy's wardrobe, that was for the son, and now getting to be a problem for them. So all of this little conflict they are building, and I think what it actually makes this work is the descriptive language that you use.
Okay.
That is, because you can almost feel it, that you were there. That's my take. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that's actually a whole other segment of storytelling. Somebody commented on it with Michael, but yeah, to have very specific descriptive words is a big bonus in storytelling. Angie. Hi, Angie.
Hi, Roxanne. I'm a big note taker. In your first story, I took 6 words: Amy hiked, storm, pulled muscle, and cold. My notes for the second story: you described the setting very well, beautiful. You named the canyon. Then you went on to describe Bob, his shape, his age. You described Amy. We had a great vision of who Amy was: no fat, all muscle. You then talked about the relationship between the two. So that kind of tells me that later on you're going to bring up relationship again. You added more description on how they moved and why they moved that way. You also told us how they saw the storm come in and how they felt when the storm came in, which leads me to you bringing some emotion into it. You talked about fear and why it was hard to walk, what the problem was, and then another emotion, pain, and then to the struggle, and then some physical aspects that were not in the first story, hills and boats and docks. You added more about the setting, the Good Samaritan that came in. That adds a little bit more to the story, more physical. And then toward the end, you brought in that relationship strength, kind of the moral to the story, and how they were tested and brought it all back together. And with all of that, you also added many gestures, which enlivened the story. And I took 2.5 pages of notes on the second story.
You are a good note taker, my goodness.
Back to you.
I have to put in a good word for Bob on this. When he originally told me the story, that goes back 11 years ago, he has improved so much in the last 11 years. So his storytelling is way better, but back then it was pretty sparse. So anybody else? I'm gonna, okay, yes, Suzanne. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi. I really liked the severity of the Good Samaritan, as Angie named her. You kind of leaned forward and said, the hypothermia, you're coming into, so that's like, I'm not just shaking, this is really dangerous. And so you really made that point. Your voice was very clear and firm. You leaned forward and it was like, oh yeah, I hope she makes it. My first time with this story. So excellent drama to really get our attention. I appreciated that.
Thank you. I'm going to go real quick to page 2 of the screen. And is there anybody on page 2 who has a comment? Oh yes, Judy.
Well, I appreciated the story. The tension built up and reinforced each other. The pivotal moment came when he sprained his muscles, and I could see that's where a turn. The story was going to escalate bigger and more plot was building up.
Yeah.
And the ending was superb, where there was a beautiful ending where nobody died and the tension conflict resolved. It was that they lived happily ever after.
Good. Yeah, there was actually a point after Bob pulled his muscle that Amy told me, I didn't include this in the story. Amy weighs about 125 pounds. She's like, I was thinking, could I carry my father out of the canyon if I needed to? Because he was hurting there. But okay, well, let me just wrap up here. Tension makes the story. Tension adds the impact. You see the tension in the setting, in the characters, and in the plot. So when you think of your signature story, remember I told you to think of that story that you tell and retell. Where are you going to add the tension, Mr. Toastmaster?